Students, today we are going to discuss about the excess demand. So before going to start the topic excess demand, first we have to understand the meaning of excess demand. What is excess demand? So in our previous video, already we discussed about the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So in simple, when aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, it means when AD greater than AS, aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, then this is called what? Excess demand. Very simple. When aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. Clear? Now you see excess demand. So excess demand refers to the situation when AD is more than AS. AD is more than AS corresponding to full employment level of output in the economy. Very simple to understand. When AD is more than AS, AD means aggregate demand, AS aggregate supply, corresponding to full employment level of output, then this is called excess demand. Is it clear? It means when aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. Okay, so then this is called the excess demand. And this excess demand, because of this excess demand, we'll understand that this inflationary gap arises. Is it clear? So when there is an excess demand means what? Aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. So when aggregate demand is more, then definitely it will increase the price level. Is it clear? So this is the inflationary gap. So when you see the inflationary gap, then what you will understand? Oh, this is the excess demand. Clear? So now you see inflationary gap refers to the gap by which actual AD exceeds the AD required to establish the full employment equilibrium. So it means when actual AD is more than required AD, which one we need for full employment. Is it clear? It means actual aggregate demand is more than which one we need AD for full employment. Then this is called the inflationary gap. So now if you see this diagram, then you will understand it very easily. So in this diagram, OX denotes income, output, employment. OY denotes AD. AD means what? Aggregate demand. This is the 45-degree line. What it is called? This is the income line, the AAS, or we can say national income. So this line, and after that already we discussed the shape of AD curve and how you can derive the aggregate demand curve. So in here directly we will discuss, but if you have any confusion to understand this shape, so then you can watch the previous video where we discussed about the shape of AD curve, like why AD starts from here, not from here, everything will get there. So now you see this is the aggregate demand curve. So we know that in here C plus I, C for consumption and I for investment. Okay, so C household consumption, I is the investment. Is it clear? So aggregate demand, this is the original aggregate demand curve. Okay, so suppose I will write here AS. Now you see when AS and AD, see here AS and AD, they intersect at point E, this point, and this is called the full employment equilibrium. Okay, but because of change in investment, or other reasons when aggregate curve, see, shift to the right side. See here, this is the original demand curve and this is the new demand curve. So in here, what you understand, that aggregate demand increases, and when aggregate demand shift to the upside, see here, so then this is gap, no? From E to F, this gap. So this gap is called the inflationary gap. This gap is called the inflationary gap. It means the gap between this original aggregate demand curve and the new aggregate demand curve, which is called the inflationary gap. So that's why I have written here, inflationary gap refers to the gap by which actual aggregate demand, which one is the actual aggregate demand, this AD1, exceed the AD required to establish full employment equilibrium. Which one is the AD required to establish full employment equilibrium? This AD. Okay, so this gap between the actual and required AD for full employment, this gap is called the inflationary gap. This one. So we all know inflation means what? Rise in price of the commodity. It means decrease in the value of money or increase in the value of a commodity. So because of increase in this aggregate demand, so what happened? This inflationary gap arises. Very simple. So first you have to draw aggregate demand curve, then aggregate supply curve or income curve. So when they intersect, this is the full employment equilibrium. But you have seen that when AD is in here, it means this AD is showing the actual AD, which is more than this AD. So then this gap is called the inflationary gap. Now we'll understand the reasons for excess demand, actually why it happens. Now you see this one is the AD C plus I, but in here AD1 C plus I plus delta I. Why? Why excess demand? First one is a rise in the propensity to consume. Propensity to consume means tendency to consume. If you have more propensity to consume, then you will demand more product. And we all know that increase in demand means definitely increase in price of the commodity. Simple. Second one is a reduction in taxes. So when government will impose less tax on a product, what will happen? Price of the commodity will decrease. Then people can buy more and it will increase the demand. So it will lead to this excess demand. Simple. Then third is increase in government expenditure. So when government invests more for the development to maintain the welfare, then it demands more for goods and services. So it can also lead to the excess demand. Number 4, increase in investment. Same thing. So when investment increases, then people will get job. They can increase their level of income. When more income, definitely more demand, and it will lead to the excess demand. Then fall in import. When import decreases, then people will demand for our domestic good and services. Then automatically demand will increase and it will lead to the excess demand. Then a rise in export. When export increases, then what happens? Export increases means income increases. So when income increases, then more demand. Then deficit financing. So this deficit financing increase the money supply. And when more money supply, already we discussed, more demand and it will lead to excess demand. Simple. Then last, see here the impact of excess demand, which is very important. In exam must you have to write the impact of excess demand, and it's very common question for 2 marks. So impact of excess demand. So there are 3 impacts, like effect on output, effect on employment, and effect on general price level. So now you see what is the effect on output. Excess demand does not affect the level of output because economy is already at full employment level. Is it because this economy is already in full employment? So that's why there is no any effect on level of output. Where is level of output? This is OM. Okay, so you just remember, if income, then you write income. If output, output, employment. So you see the question and write according to the question. If question is asking income, then you can write income. Question is asking employment, then you write employment. Okay, so excess demand does not affect the level of output because economy is already at full employment level. Number 2, there will be no change in level of employment as the economy is already operating at full employment equilibrium. And third one is excess demand lead to rise in general price level. So in here, what you have understand, it means in here output and employment will be same, but price level will increase. Clear? So this is all about the excess demand. So quickly you see what we discussed. Excess demand is aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. Because of this excess demand, inflationary gap arises. What is inflationary gap? The gap between actual aggregate demand and the AD required for the full employment. The gap is called the inflationary gap. And what are the reasons for excess demand? Like a propensity to consume, reduction in tax, increase in government expenditure, increase in invest, fall in imports, rise in export, deficit financing. And what is the impact? Effect on output, so it will be remain same because economy is already in full employment level. Effect on employment, same thing. Okay, but effect on general price level, in here price level will increase. So this is all about the excess demand. So I hope you understood this lesson, but if you have any problems, then let me know in the comment section below and I will talk to you there.